Microsoft Bob. Microsoft Bob launched in 1995 with a simple belief. Computers were intimidating, and normal people needed something friendlier. Instead of technical menus, icons, and folders, Bob turned the computer into a virtual house. Programs appeared as objects inside rooms. Your email lived in one place, your calendar in another. Everything looked playful and welcoming. On paper, it sounded revolutionary. In reality, it made basic tasks slower. Finding files required navigating rooms instead of clicking folders. Actions that once took seconds now took multiple steps. On already slow computers of the time, Bob felt heavy and unresponsive. Users didn't feel empowered. They felt talked down to. Experienced users felt limited, and beginners felt confused rather than guided. Bob assumed the problem was fear of computers, when the real problem was clarity and efficiency. Within months, stores stopped pushing it, and Microsoft quietly erased it from its future plans. Why Microsoft Bob OS failed? It made simple tasks more complicated. It underestimated users instead of helping them. Performance was poor on common hardware. IBM OS/2. IBM OS/2 was built to be serious, stable, and professional. It supported real multitasking and protected memory at a time when Windows could still freeze from one misbehaving program. From a technical standpoint, OS/2 was ahead of its time. But technology alone doesn't win markets. OS/2 started as a joint project between IBM and Microsoft. When that partnership ended, the platform was left in an awkward position. Developers didn't know whether to build for OS/2 or Windows. Hardware manufacturers didn't prioritize drivers. Some Windows applications worked, others didn't. For normal users, buying a computer isn't about innovation. It's about certainty. Will my printer work? Will my software install? Windows answered those questions clearly. OS/2 did not. That uncertainty pushed OS/2 out of homes and into controlled environments like banks and corporate systems, where consistency mattered more than popularity. Why IBM OS/2 failed? Unclear direction after the IBM-Microsoft split. Weak software and driver ecosystem. Windows became the safer default choice. Google Fuchsia. Google Fuchsia is one of the most mysterious operating systems ever created. Built completely from scratch, it promised modern security, flexibility, and long-term stability. Engineers admired it. From a technical perspective, it was impressive. For normal users, however, it raised one big question. What is it for? Android already worked well on phones. Chrome OS already handled lightweight laptops. Fuchsia didn't clearly replace either of them. It also didn't solve a problem people actively felt. Without a clear role, excitement never formed. There was no rush to adopt it, no strong reason to switch. Development continued quietly in the background, but public interest faded fast. Fuchsia shows that even brilliant engineering can fail if the purpose isn't clear. Why Google Fuchsia failed? No clear role in Google's ecosystem. Did not solve a visible user problem. Strong engineering, but weak public direction. Windows Phone 7. Windows Phone 7 arrived with confidence and a bold identity. Live tiles replaced static icons. Animations felt smooth. The interface looked modern without copying competitors. For the first time in years, Microsoft felt fresh in mobile. Early users liked it. Reviews were mostly positive. The system was fast and clean, but the trust didn't last long. Microsoft announced Windows Phone 8, and many Windows Phone 7 devices couldn't upgrade. Early adopters were suddenly stuck. That single decision broke confidence. Developers hesitated to invest time. Users stopped recommending the platform. A phone doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs a future. Windows Phone 7 lost that future almost immediately. Why Windows Phone 7 failed? Early users were abandoned too quickly. Developers lost trust in platform stability. Ecosystem collapsed before it matured. Apple Copland. In the mid-1990s, Apple was struggling. Windows 95 had just taken over the PC world. Macs were losing relevance, and Apple's classic macOS was showing its age. It couldn't multitask properly, it crashed often, and it wasn't built for the future. To fix this, Apple started an ambitious internal project called Copland. Copland was meant to be a complete modernization of macOS. Apple wanted to add protected memory, preemptive multitasking, better stability, and a modern system architecture. On paper, Copland was supposed to be what macOS is today. It was planned as the foundation for Apple's future computers and was expected to save the company. But Copland quickly became a mess. Apple kept adding features without finishing existing ones. Different teams worked in isolation, integration was poor, and deadlines kept slipping. What started as a system upgrade turned into an unmanageable monster. Demo versions barely worked, crashed constantly, and ran slower than the old OS they were supposed to replace. By 1996, it was clear Copland was not salvageable. Apple made a drastic decision: cancel the project entirely. Instead of fixing Copland, Apple bought Next, bringing Steve Jobs back and using NextStep as the foundation for macOS. Copland quietly disappeared, but its failure reshaped Apple's future. Why Apple Copland failed? Feature creep made the system too complex to finish. Poor project management and internal coordination. Apple's outdated technical base couldn't support Copland's goals. BlackBerry OS. Before iPhones and Android phones ruled the world, BlackBerry OS was king. In the early 2000s, BlackBerry devices were everywhere, especially in offices, governments, and corporations. Secure email, physical keyboards, and reliability made BlackBerry the most trusted smartphone platform of its time. BlackBerry OS was designed for efficiency, not beauty. It focused on messaging, battery life, and security. For years, this worked perfectly. Business users loved it, and BlackBerry dominated the smartphone market globally. At its peak, BlackBerry was untouchable. Then the iPhone arrived. Touch screens, smooth animations, and app-centric design changed user expectations overnight. BlackBerry OS struggled to adapt. It wasn't built for touch-first interaction, modern apps, or multimedia-heavy usage. Developers found it hard to work with, and consumers found it outdated. BlackBerry tried to respond with updates and later BlackBerry 10, but it was too late. Android and iOS had already captured developers, users, and manufacturers. BlackBerry OS slowly faded away, turning a market leader into a cautionary tale. Why BlackBerry OS failed? Ignored the shift toward touchscreens and consumer apps. Weak developer ecosystem compared to iOS and Android. Focused too long on business users while consumers moved on. Windows RT. Windows RT was Microsoft's bold attempt to enter the tablet market during the early 2010s. The idea was simple: bring Windows to ARM-based processors for better battery life and thinner devices, similar to iPads. On the surface, Windows RT looked just like Windows 8. But under the hood, it was very different. Windows RT could not run traditional Windows desktop applications. Only apps from a Windows store were allowed, except for a few pre-installed Microsoft tools. This limitation confused users, especially since RT devices looked exactly like normal Windows PCs. Consumers expected full Windows functionality and felt cheated when their software didn't work. Developers didn't support the platform, sales were weak, and Microsoft had to take massive financial write-downs on unsold devices. Windows RT quietly disappeared from the roadmap. Why Windows RT failed? Could not run traditional Windows desktop software. Confused users with identical Windows branding. Lack of developer and app support. Symbian OS. Symbian OS was once the most widely used smartphone operating system in the world. Built primarily for Nokia devices, Symbian powered millions of phones during the early smartphone era. It was efficient, flexible, and worked well on limited hardware. However, Symbian was designed in a different era. Its interface was complex, inconsistent, and difficult for developers to work with. As smartphones evolved into app-centric, touch-based devices, Symbian struggled to keep up. Nokia tried to modernize Symbian, but progress was slow. Meanwhile, iOS and Android offered simpler development tools, better user experiences, and stronger ecosystems. Eventually, Nokia abandoned Symbian entirely in favor of Windows Phone, marking the end of an era. Why Symbian OS failed. Complex architecture made development slow and difficult. Poor touch experience compared to competitors. Could not evolve fast enough for modern smartphones. Looking back at these operating systems, it's clear that technical brilliance alone isn't enough to succeed. Timing, user trust, and a strong ecosystem matter just as much, if not more. An OS can have great ideas, but without adoption, it quickly becomes forgotten history. These failures remind us that solving real problems for real users is what keeps software alive.